the RAF took the first strike against the Argentinian invaders of the Falkland Islands. Its bombs delivered an unmistakable message. The British are coming, and we will not be defeated. Only one aircraft could achieve this seemingly impossible mission over such great distances: the legendary Vulcan bomber. As large as a Boeing 737-200, as fast as a fighter, with an operational ceiling of 65,000 feet, her delta shape and ultra-secret anti-radar devices made her all but invisible to enemy forces. She was unlike anything that the world had seen before, and her awesome power sent shockwaves through the Russian Politburo.
Он думает, как он придет завтра, и ему нечего дать для того, чтобы купить продукты на стол. Вот с этими мыслями он сидит на важнейшей работе. Он сидит на...
It was obvious that the Vulcan was designed for one purpose: to deliver a devastating nuclear strike against our Soviet enemies in the Cold War. This awesome weapon needed a name that would strike terror into the hearts of our opponents. Vulcan, the Roman god of fire and iron. And so was born an aeronautical legend.
But it just would not do. The wings were too large and too heavy. An alternative concept we explored was the Tailless aircraft. But here again we were beaten by weight. The specification demands a very high cruising speed, close to that of sound, and this means that the wings must have a low thickness chord ratio, a low wing loading, high sweep back, and low aspect ratio. Our project studies led us eventually to the triangular or delta planform, which gave the best combination of these features.
The Vulcan's revolutionary shape caused much consternation in the 1950s. Although originally it was felt that the design might not give enough lift or cause drag, in fact, entirely the opposite was true. Aviation journalist Peter March recalls the first time he saw this revolutionary aircraft fly.
It was September 1952, the Farnborough Air Show, and out over the Laffans plain there was a distinctive shape in the sky. A triangle, a white triangle, something I'd never seen before. And as it came across the airfield, there was the Vulcan coming into view and displaying for a aghast public. They'd never seen anything like it before. Now, Roly Falk was a distinctive test pilot like no other. He flew that Vulcan in August, just a week before it was displaying at the Farnborough Air Show.
Farnborough 1952, and the Avro Vulcan comes off the secret list. The world's first delta-wing bomber, it sets new standards of load carrying, faster, higher and further than ever before.
The subsequent years he rolled it. Unimaginable for a bomber to be rolled at a public display. And he rolled it because he had the concept from the very beginning that he could fly it like a fighter.
A post-World War II analysis of Allied strategic bombing affirmed the success of such tactics during the war. The new importance of nuclear weapons made it all the more imperative that the world's nuclear powers had long-range delivery capabilities. Britain's Royal Air Force issued a requirement for a new aircraft design which could be based anywhere in the world, be able to strike targets up to 1,700 miles away, and deliver a heavy bomb load from high speed and high altitude. One of the three finalists for the job was the Avro Vulcan, first flown on the 3rd of August 1952. The Vulcan's main distinctive physical characteristic, its large delta wing shape, was a result of the need for structural integrity and a large payload capacity. The first production model of the Vulcan, the B.1, flew in early 1955, and after a major wing design change, entered service. 1950s, former chief designer for BAE Systems, David Nadin, was a young boy. He remembers the awesome sight of the first Vulcans flying around Avro's Woodford factory.
Well, I climbed up the hill of the back house, and I must sort of put my age on this. I was about 11 and a half, 12. And over the hill came this formation of two Vulcans lying astern, two white Vulcans, straight leading edge, with four small 707s on each corner, which is the model here. Actually in red, so they were painted red. And they were flying around the area of Maxfield, getting the formation right. And that went down to Farnborough in 1957, and you see pictures of that in magazines and papers at the time. I can't really explain it, but really this is where my desire was to get involved in aviation, was to get a job at Roe and Company Limited and work on the design side.
Remarkably, having been inspired to get into aircraft design by the Mark I Vulcan, as a qualified designer, David Nadin would find himself working on the design of the Mark II.
Structurally, the B.2 is very similar to a Mark I. Nose, fuselage, fin are the same, and the range of the engines. One thing that distinguishes the Mark II is the bigger wingspan, and also to get better aerodynamic lift out of it, they increase the actual leading edge kink line.
The Vulcan's striking power was increased by the Avro standoff bomb, perhaps the most important factor in the vital role this aircraft was destined to play. This guided weapon, designed and built by Avro, gave enormous tactical advantages. The Vulcan indeed became a fully controllable missile launching platform.
The Vulcan was once one of the most deadly weapons ever devised and a deterrent against the Russian threat that nearly ended in World War III. A dark period in history that legendary author, former RAF pilot and Vulcan fan Frederick Forsyth remembers well.
The Cuba Missile Crisis started with a photograph. Well, actually a lot of photographs. They were taken by a very high-flying American U-2 spy plane over Cuba. And when they were developed, what they showed was a number of clearings in the forests, and inside the clearings what appeared to be sticks, but they were not sticks. They were rockets, and they weren't even defensive rockets. They were Soviet attack rockets, and they were aimed directly at the heart of the USA. Well, as far as President Kennedy was concerned, that was not acceptable, and he called Mr. Khrushchev over in Moscow and told him, quite literally, to remove them. Khrushchev refused. In fact, he went further. He said that a number of further Soviet vessels were on their way to Cuba with further rockets and rocket parts. The American response was to put a line of US Navy warships in the sea east of Cuba between the oncoming Soviet vessels and the land. And then President Kennedy said, if you cross this line, we shall sink your ships. And Khrushchev replied, if you do, we'll regard that as a declaration of war. They were literally staring at each other a few inches away, face to face.
If America was attacked, the retaliation would involve British Vulcan bombers attacking Moscow. This threat led to the construction of top-secret nuclear bunkers around the UK.
This is one of three existing bunkers buried deep under the fields of England, unbeknownst even to the agricultural workers who plough the fields far above our heads. And this is where the secret government, after a nuclear wipeout, would have taken place. Of the various times and occasions when danger seemed particularly high, there's one that still stands out so clearly that it raises hackles on the necks of those who remember it well. It occupied one long and very sweaty weekend in October 1962, and today it's simply referred to as the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it was the time when we probably came closest to global nuclear war.
Attention, attention, this is the bomber controller for bomb list Sierra. Scramble. For bomb list Sierra. Scramble. Bomber controller out.
One man who experienced the pressures of being on nuclear standby during the Cold War was Vulcan bomber Air Electronics Officer Mike Pearson.
On every V4 station, 4 V-bombers would positioned at the end of the main runway. They would be loaded up with the type of weapons that they were tasked with dropping, and by this I mean real live nuclear weapons or atomic weapons. What we would wear would be our air ventilated suits, which were next to our skin, a flying overall, then G trousers, pressure trousers, a pressure jerking, and then on top of that we would wear a Mae West. And we wore that for 24 hours. So we slept in it, and it was very uncomfortable because all the connectors, tubes, came out to a thing down the side, like a single connector, a chute type connector. And trying to get to sleep sometimes was very difficult. Our aim would be to get 4 Vulcans airborne in about a minute and 40 seconds. So from stone cold, in other words, nothing running, to actually getting airborne, we would do it in about a minute and 40 seconds.
This ultra-rapid scramble time was of course essential. Any slower and the retaliating Vulcan fleet would be caught up in the devastating blast when Soviet nuclear weapons struck the UK. The irony would be that even if the Vulcans successfully launched missiles against Moscow, the aircraft would have no airfields to return to, as the initial Russian attack would have wiped out the UK. By the time of the Cuban crisis, doubts were surfacing about the ability of the RAF to pierce the defenses of the Soviet Union. The shooting down of Gary Powers in a U-2 spy plane in 1960 confirmed that the Soviet Union did have surface-to-air missiles capable of reaching the heights that bombers operated at. The new mantra became ultra-low-level attack. Instead of operating at over 60,000 feet, the Vulcan crews would now be operating at under 250 feet. This would not only avoid surface-to-air missiles, but allow pilots to use the new bombing technique called flick bombing, which saw the pilots do a 90-degree climb at the point of bomb release. The extra inertia created by this maneuver would literally throw the bombs at the target area.
The Air Ministry realized that the surface-to-air missiles that the Russians had could get us. So, hence, we went low level. And I did one of the first low-level flights on my squadron, and this consisted of flying out into the Bristol Channel, heading for the island of Lundy, coming inland. We then had to climb to get over Lundy, drop down again, cross the coast, turn left, up over Snowdonia, then drop down again to coast out at a place called Rhyl. On one of our trips, we were coasting out over Rhyl, and we disappeared into the mist. And when we got back, my Wing Commander Operations came to me and said, "Where were you just before midday?" And I looked at my log and I said, "Oh, we were just coasting out over Rhyl." "Oh," he said, "thank God it's you. You were reported as crashing." And the reason for that was that in those days the Vulcans used to trail a lot of black smoke.
Throughout the 1970s and early 80s, the Soviets were still very much a threat at sea, and a number of the remaining airworthy Vulcans carried out a vital reconnaissance role, working with the Royal Navy.
Well, I served on 27th Squadron for about 2 years in the maritime radar reconnaissance role. I was a co-pilot, and our main job was to fly at about 25,000 feet, and the radar navigator would map the ocean as looking for ships and mark them down on a grid, which he would transmit openly. Our submarines would pick up the information, and they knew where our ships were, and therefore anything left was the enemy shipping. The other role we did was to go down and look at Soviet ships, the military ships, and take photographs of them so that we could send them back for analysis, for looking for any new weapon systems they had on board the ships.
Despite their vital work at sea, the end was nigh for the Vulcan fleet. The RAF began the decommissioning process by disbanding No. 230 Operational Conversion Unit at Scampton on the 31st of August 1981. The remaining squadrons of Vulcans were scheduled to close at the end of June 1982. It seemed a low-key ending to a fantastic career for a groundbreaking aircraft. Some of her crews wished she could end her service in style. Then, on the 2nd of April 1982, Argentine forces under the command of Admiral Carlos Busa invaded the British territories of the Falkland Islands and South Georgia in the South Atlantic.
The House meets this Saturday to respond to a situation of great gravity. We are here because for the first time for many years, British sovereign territory has been invaded by a foreign power. After several days of rising tension in our relations with Argentina, that country's armed forces attacked the Falkland Islands yesterday and established military control of the islands.
It became clear within the first few days of the Argentine invasion that their recovery of the Falklands would entail a major military operation, spearheaded by the RAF. For the heavy bombing roles, there was only one aircraft which could perform the job: the Vulcan bomber. Plans to disband the Vulcan fleet were suspended, and all flight crew leave revoked. Following the Argentine invasion of the Falkland Islands in April 1982, Vulcan disbandment plans were suspended, and the training of flight crews in conventional bombing operations and in-flight refueling had commenced. However, as former Vulcan Air Electronics officer Barry Macefield explains, it was training which was fraught with danger.
Because the aeroplanes hadn't been used for in-flight refueling for decades, all the seals and couplings in the refueling probe, which pokes out from the front of the nose, they had all dried up and perished. And every time we tried to make contact with the Victor tanker, the fuel would escape from the front of the probe, would come over the front of the windscreen, would be squirting down the side of the aeroplane. What worried me more than anything else, being in charge of all the electrical equipment, was the fumes which possibly were in the cockpit. With lots of arcing and sparking going around here, are we going to end up as a big fireball?
Despite the dangers, training continued, until finally the Vulcan was deployed in anger on bombing raids codenamed Black Buck. Their mission required them to fly a record-breaking 7,700 miles between the nearest available base, Wide Awake Airfield on Ascension Island, and Britain's own runway in enemy-occupied Port Stanley. Then, after many hours of flying, they must destroy the runway, preventing the Argentines from using it as a base for air attacks.
It was a very difficult operation. The Vulcan, as I say, was about to go out of service. As always, the Royal Air Force, but I mean all the armed services, in this case the Royal Air Force, pulled out all the stops, as did industry incidentally. And between us all, we cobbled together a plan to put a bomb on the airfield and the runway at Port Stanley. 8,000-mile round trip from Ascension Island, the longest strike bombing mission in history at that time. And it was all done on a little bit of a wing and a prayer.
Well, the thing which attracted me to the story was that somebody had the imagination and the ambition to even dream it was possible. They were being asked to bomb a target which was going to be the same distance from London as Hawaii is, near the Arctic Circle, over 4,000 miles of open sea, without anything more to navigate over that sea than a sextant, or the same sort of thing that Nelson would use. The sort of shape of that story and the challenges involved seemed to me kind of very similar to sort of a story like the Dam Busters. It was, okay, here's an impossible job, go out and do it. You haven't really got the tools for it, but don't let that bother you. And through a kind of combination of ingenuity, pluck, sort of bloody-mindedness, they managed to sort of put together something that works.
These operations have justifiably developed an almost myth-like status. The planes were flying apart, not truly fit for service. The danger of enemy attack extreme because the Vulcans had no fighter support. And because of the incredible distance involved, a remarkable piggyback refueling strategy had to be devised using the Victor tanker.
The whole principle of the air-to-air refueling is that the aircraft make you topped up all the time to give it enough fuel to get back to an airfield. Now obviously if you're travelling 3,500, 4,000 miles across the Atlantic, then unless you've got an aircraft with a really long range, you need to refuel lots of times. So we were scheduled to refuel 5 times on the way down to the South Atlantic, and then we would then set off full to do the attack, and then some hours later we would meet up with a Victor off the coast of Brazil, and then fill up with enough fuel to get us back to Ascension Island.
With all the odds stacked against them, the Vulcans and their brave flight crews soared into war and their finest hour.
I was acutely aware that all the lights and everything were on the airfield. It felt very, very cold-blooded to go in and just drop bombs on people, because at that stage you had no animosity towards them. You weren't actually feeling that you were defending your own troops or anything like this. It was just a cold-blooded attack, drop a bomb. And it was then just a matter of just holding the thing really steady and hoping that we were aiming at the right point. And then the second that the last bomb had dropped, just banking the aircraft and getting the hell out of there.
The thing that ran through my mind at the time was there was no flak coming at us. I was expecting sort of lights of flak to be going past us, but also there was no orchestra playing. And again, we had never done this before. I'd only ever seen it on the movies. And on the movies, when you go in for a bombing run, there's the orchestra in the background playing away.
When news spread that the first Black Buck Vulcan raid had achieved its seemingly impossible mission, it sent a wave of euphoria around our armed forces and at home.
What's your reaction? Rejoice at that news and congratulate our forces and the Marines.
Are we good?
Good night.
The 7th and final Black Buck mission was flown on the 11th and 12th of June and delivered airburst bombs. Although only minor damage resulted from the Black Buck missions, the May the 1st attack had been awe-inspiring. It delivered a warning that no combat aircraft would be safe at Port Stanley. Consequently, no Argentinian fighters landed there. The Vulcans heralded Britain's unwavering response to the Argentinian aggression, a testament to the RAF's stoicism and invention in the face of adversity.